My name is Emily, and if you had told me a year ago that one spilled glass of wine could unravel my entire marriage, I would have laughed in your face. I used to believe that the strongest families were built on love, patience, and forgiveness. But I was wrong. What I learned is that some people hide behind masks, waiting for the smallest slip to tear you down, waiting for a single accident to expose the ugly truth of who they are. And I saw all of it the night I spilled wine on my father-in-law. It wasn't even an extraordinary night. It was supposed to be just another family dinner, one of those evenings where everyone gathered around the table, smiled politely, and pretended everything was perfect. My husband, Mark, was close to his family, sometimes uncomfortably close. They had this unspoken rule that his parents, especially his father, came before everything. Before friends, before work, and apparently even before me. I had brushed it off for the longest time, convincing myself that it was harmless. But what happened that night proved to me that I was never really part of that family. We arrived at their house, and I already felt the tension. His mother had prepared a huge spread. His sisters were buzzing around like bees, and his father sat at the head of the table with the presence of a king. Everything about him demanded respect. He was the kind of man who thought his word was law, the kind of man who believed he could control the room with just a glare. And honestly, most of the time, he could. Dinner went smoothly at first, though I noticed his father's eyes on me more than once, sharp and critical, as though he were waiting for me to mess something up. I tried to ignore it. I laughed at the right moments. I complimented the food, and I kept my posture straight. But no matter what I did, I could feel the weight of his judgment pressing down on me. Then it happened. I reached for the wine bottle to refill my glass. My hand slipped just slightly, just enough that the glass tipped over. Deep red wine spilled across the table and splashed directly onto my father-in-law's pristine white shirt. The entire table went silent. You could hear the sharp intake of breath from everyone sitting there. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I immediately grabbed napkins, stammering apologies, trying desperately to fix the mess. "I'm so sorry. It was an accident," I said, my hands trembling as I dabbed uselessly at his shirt. But before I could process what was happening, his hand shot out. A heavy, sudden, violent force cracked against the side of my face. He had punched me. My own father-in-law had struck me across the cheek in front of everyone at that table. The room froze. My cheek burned, my vision blurred with tears, and the weight of shock kept me paralyzed. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't breathe. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. They all just sat there, eyes wide, pretending like they hadn't just seen what they saw. I looked at my husband, expecting him to leap up, to defend me, to stand by me. But instead, he leaned back in his chair, his face cold, his eyes full of something I couldn't read. And then he spoke, his voice calm but sharp, cutting me deeper than the slap had. "Apologize," he said. I blinked at him, thinking I had misheard. My cheek was throbbing, and I tasted blood in my mouth. But I thought surely he couldn't mean it. Surely he wouldn't side with his father after what just happened. But he repeated it, his tone harder this time. "Apologize, or leave." The words hit me harder than the punch had. I stared at him, waiting for him to take it back, waiting for him to realize what he had just said. But he didn't. He just sat there, glaring at me as if I were the one who had ruined everything. His family stayed quiet, complicit in their silence. Not one of them spoke up. Not one of them came to my defense. I felt my whole world crumbling in that moment. The man I thought would protect me, the man I had vowed to spend my life with, had chosen his father's pride over my dignity. My hands trembled as I stood up from the table. The napkin I had been holding slipped from my grip, falling to the floor, stained red with the wine that had started it all. and then I walked out. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside, tears streaming down my cheeks. My body was shaking, not just from the pain of being hit, but from the betrayal that cuts so much deeper. I got into my car, started the engine with trembling hands, and drove away. My phone buzzed with messages, but I didn't answer. My husband called me, but I let it ring. I couldn't bring myself to hear his voice, not when I could still feel the echo of his words in my head. Apologize or leave. I chose to leave. That night, as I sat alone in our apartment, staring at the life we had built together, I realized it had all been a lie. All those years I thought I was loved. I thought I was valued. But the truth was, I had always been second place. I had never been his priority. His family came first, and I was just an outsider, tolerated until I wasn't. The betrayal cut deeper than I could put into words, and as the hours passed, one thing became painfully clear. I couldn't go back. I wouldn't go back. I was done being silent. I was done being the one who always forgave, always smoothed things over, always carried the weight of their cruelty. And so began my journey, not just to walk away, but to make sure they all understood exactly what they had lost. Because if they thought I would just disappear quietly, they were wrong. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel the sting of his hand across my face. Still hear my husband's voice, telling me to apologize or leave. I replayed it again and again, wondering if I had missed something, if there had been a moment where he had hesitated, where he had considered standing up for me. But the truth was, there hadn't been. He had made his choice without flinching. He had chosen them, and I had walked away. In the morning, I sat at our kitchen table, staring at the coffee I had poured, but hadn't touched. My phone buzzed again. Messages from Mark, some short, some long, all of them demanding to know where I was, telling me to come back, telling me I had overreacted. None of them said the words I needed to hear. None of them contained an apology, or even an ounce of accountability. He didn't say he was sorry for what his father had done. He didn't say he was sorry for forcing me to choose between my dignity and my marriage. All he wanted was for me to crawl back, to pretend it hadn't happened. I couldn't. When he finally showed up at the apartment later that afternoon, I didn't even recognize him. His face was tight with frustration, not concern. His words were sharp, not gentle. He tried to twist it all around, making it sound as if I had embarrassed his father, as if I had caused the problem. It was an accident, I kept saying, my voice cracking, my hands trembling. But he didn't care. To him, his father's reputation was worth more than my pain. And that was the moment I knew our marriage was over. Maybe not on paper yet, but in my heart, it was done. I packed a bag that night. Just the essentials, just enough to get me through the next few days. I didn't tell him where I was going. I just left, quietly, with tears in my eyes, and a heaviness in my chest that I can't even put into words. I drove to my friend Sarah's house, someone who had always been there for me, someone I knew wouldn't question me or judge me. When she opened the door and saw my face, swollen and bruised, she didn't ask a single question. She just wrapped her arms around me and held me as I cried. For the first time in days, I felt safe. Over the next week, I stayed with Sarah, slowly gathering the strength I needed. Mark called endlessly, but I let most of the calls go unanswered. The few times I did pick up, it was always the same. Him insisting I come home, him brushing aside what had happened, him trying to convince me that family loyalty mattered more than my pride. I realized then that he didn't see me as his partner, as his equal. He saw me as someone who should fall in line, who should stay quiet, who should endure humiliation for the sake of keeping the peace. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Word spread quickly among his family. His mother sent me a cold clipped message saying she hoped I had learned my lesson. His sisters didn't reach out at all. And his father. He didn't even acknowledge me. It was as if I had already been erased from their lives. The silence from them was deafening, but it also gave me clarity. I wasn't losing a family. I was finally seeing the truth of what they had always been. Sarah kept reminding me that walking away was the bravest thing I could do. But inside, I felt a storm building. I didn't just want to leave quietly. I didn't just want to vanish and let them think they had won. I wanted them to face what they had done. I wanted the world to see the cracks behind their perfect facade. So I began writing everything down, every detail, every cruel word, every moment of disrespect, every instance where they had put me second, ignored my feelings, dismissed my worth. I wrote it all, not because I needed proof, but because I needed to remember. I needed to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that what they had done was real, and that I wasn't to blame. Mark tried to show up at Sarah's house once, banging on the door, shouting my name, demanding that I come out. Sarah stood between us, refusing to let him in, and eventually he left. I watched from the window as he stormed back to his car, slamming the door so hard it rattled. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear, because I knew he was growing desperate. Relief, because I realized I no longer felt guilty for leaving him standing outside. I didn't owe him anything anymore. The days turned into weeks, and the bruises on my face faded, but the ache in my chest remained. Yet with each passing day, I grew stronger. I started imagining what life could be like without them, without the constant judgment, without the suffocating loyalty to people who didn't care about me, without the man who had chosen silence over love. And slowly, I began to see the path forward. A path not just of leaving, but of reclaiming my voice. A path of showing them that I wasn't weak, I wasn't disposable, and I wasn't going to let their betrayal define me, because they thought I would stay quiet. They thought I would shrink into myself, too ashamed to tell anyone what had happened. But they were wrong. I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. And that was just the beginning. I didn't plan my next steps out of anger, though anger was always there, humming in the background like a storm waiting to break. I planned them out of clarity. For the first time in years, I was seeing things for what they really were. My marriage had been built on loyalty to his family, not loyalty to me. His love had always been conditional, and that night at the dinner table had stripped away every last excuse I used to tell myself. I wanted them to feel what I felt, not with fists or shouting, but with truth, with exposure, with the humiliation of being seen for what they really were. People like them thrived on appearances, on presenting themselves as the perfect family. If I shattered that illusion, it would wound them deeper than any punch ever could. The first step was simple. I talked, not to strangers, but to the people who had known us for years, the friends who had always admired Mark and his family, the acquaintances who had believed in their spotless reputation. I told them what had happened. At first, my voice shook, my hands trembled, but once the words left my mouth, I felt lighter. And to my surprise, people listened. Their shock mirrored my own. Some didn't know what to say, but others admitted they weren't surprised. I always felt like something was off about his father, one woman whispered. Another told me she had noticed how Mark always dismissed me in public. It was validating in a way I can't describe. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't making it up. People had seen glimpses of the truth all along. They just hadn't put the pieces together until I finally spoke. Mark found out, of course. He called me, his voice boiling with rage. "How dare you spread lies about my family?" he shouted. But I didn't flinch. I told him I hadn't lied, and that if he was so ashamed of the truth, maybe he should have thought about that before letting his father hit me in front of everyone. He hung up on me, but the damage was already done. His precious family name wasn't so untouchable anymore. His mother tried reaching out next. Her message was sharp, dripping with disdain. She told me I was destroying everything, that I was making a fool of myself. But her words only fueled me. If she thought I was humiliating myself, she had no idea what was coming. One evening, Sarah and I sat down at her kitchen table with a laptop, scrolling through social media. That's when the idea took shape. I wrote a long post. I didn't hold back. I detailed what had happened at that dinner. The spilled wine, the punch, the silence, and my husband's demand that I apologize or leave. I didn't embellish. I didn't exaggerate. I just laid out the truth in all its ugly detail. I hovered over the post button for a long time, my hands sweating, my heart racing. This wasn't just telling a few friends. This was telling everyone. This was pulling off the mask they had worn for so long. Finally, I hit share. The reaction was instant. Comments poured in. Messages flooded my inbox. Some were words of support. Others were stories of people who had faced similar betrayals. And then there were the shocked ones. The people who had always believed Mark's family was perfect. Who couldn't reconcile the image they had with the reality I had revealed. It spread fast, faster than I had expected. Within a day, dozens of people in our community were talking about it. Some defended the family, but most were outraged. And the more they defended themselves, the more guilty they looked. Silence might have saved them, but their arrogance wouldn't let them stay quiet. Mark's father even confronted me once, in public, at the grocery store. His face was red, his voice booming as he accused me of ruining his name. People turned to look, and I stood tall, my voice steady, as I said, "You ruined your own name the night you hit me. I just stopped covering it up for you." The look on his face told me everything. He wasn't used to being challenged. He wasn't used to being seen for what he truly was. And that was my revenge, right there in the middle of that store, with strangers watching his mask slip away. Mark tried to save face by pretending none of it mattered, but I could see the cracks forming. His co-workers whispered about it. His friends pulled away. The people who used to idolize him and his family now looked at them with suspicion, with doubt. Their perfect image was crumbling, and I was the one holding the hammer. But revenge wasn't just about humiliation. It was about liberation. With every person who heard the truth, I felt freer. With every whispered conversation, every raised eyebrow, every sideways glance they endured, I felt myself reclaiming pieces of the dignity they had tried to strip away from me. One night, as I sat on Sarah's couch, scrolling through the endless stream of support pouring in online, I realized something. I didn't need them anymore. Not their approval, not their acceptance, not their love. I had spent years bending myself to fit into their world, but now, for the first time, I was building my own. And the sweetest part of revenge wasn't just that they were exposed. It was that I was finally free. The silence in the room after my father-in-law's punch was louder than anything I had ever heard in my life. My cheek burned, but what hurt more wasn't the physical pain. It was the fact that my own husband stood frozen, his eyes darting between his father and me, as if unsure whose side to take. My heart was pounding, waiting, hoping for him to say something, to defend me, to even just ask if I was okay. But instead, his words cut me deeper than any strike could. Apologize to Dad, or leave. In that moment, it felt like the floor had collapsed beneath me. Apologize? For what? An accident? For daring to exist at his family dinner? For spilling a glass of wine? I looked at my husband, my partner, the man I thought would stand by me through thick and thin, and I didn't recognize him anymore. His silence was louder than his words, but both screamed the same message. I wasn't worth defending. I wiped the tears threatening to fall and stood up, the room still dead quiet. My father-in-law's glare followed me, smug and unbothered, as if he had just taught me some lesson. My mother-in-law stared at her plate, pretending she hadn't seen what just happened. And my husband, still waited for me to apologize. But instead, I grabbed my bag, lifted my chin, and walked out of the house without another word. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but it was nothing compared to the one I'd already endured. I got in the car, my hands shaking on the wheel, and as I drove away, I realized something devastating. My marriage was over, not because of spilled wine, not because of my father-in-law's anger, but because my husband showed me exactly where I stood in his life. The next day, I didn't hear from him. No apology, no explanation, just silence. It was me who finally texted him, asking if he was ready to talk. But his reply made my blood run cold. You disrespected my father. You owe him an apology before you can come back home. That was it. No concern for me. No acknowledgement of what I had gone through. Just loyalty to the man who had humiliated me. Days turned into weeks, and instead of fighting for me, my husband doubled down. He told friends and family that I had overreacted. He made me out to be the villain, all to protect his father's pride. I was left alone, isolated, betrayed, not just by his family, but by the one person who promised to love me unconditionally. And that's when I realized, sometimes the worst betrayal doesn't come from strangers or enemies. It comes from the people you trust the most, the ones who are supposed to love and protect you.